Good evening, everybody. I have a few announcements, and Pauline has an announcement, so I'll let Pauline start.
Okay, so there's a lot of talent on this island. There's a lot of talent in this room. Can they hear me? Yeah. So get yourselves ready for the talent show Saturday night. Just sign up on the writing desk in the lobby. Well, whatever your talents are, great. As long as you are exhibiting your own talents and not, like, say, reading a poem by Emily Dickinson. If you want to read a poem, make sure it's your own poem. Thanks, everybody.
And this is an evening of noting the contributions of the Katz family, because Saul will be speaking, Pauline is doing the talent show, and Rachel Katz is going to be offering Qigong the next few mornings at 7:30 in the morning. If you're not familiar with Qigong, it's a very gentle, beautiful energy movement, really, really grounding, and it will be at the end of the porch at 7:30. We'll put it on the chalkboard, and we'll put it in the beacon, but I want to make sure and announce it now so that you all know. And changing hats just a little bit. there are some really wonderful contributions to our auction. And see that man with the camera? That guy? That guy. He's, not only is he our IRAS treasurer, but he's a fantastic photographer. He's got some photos. His talented wife, Jane, has a beautiful, beautiful pastel of gulls. And we have hand-knit, beautiful hand-knit hat from Dolly, which I hope no one else bids on. I mean, which someone should bid me up on. And and we have all kinds of other donations there. So please go and bid and know that it all goes to support those people who might need a little help getting here financially, so that we can be more inclusive of different financial levels that people have. CJ's not here. I'm trying to think if I'm missing anything. Does anyone have any questions?
The notes.
The notes. Oh, thank you, Pauline. In the lobby, there are cards that for people who often come and can't this year, like Carl Peters is an example. So please go sign their cards, write them a little note. If you run out of room, just get a piece of paper and stick it in the envelope with their name on it. And I think that's all. So, without further ado, oh, did you want to? I was going to introduce you. Maybe Saul needs no introduction because he's a beautiful institution here at STAR. But I'm going to introduce him anyway. Solomon H. Katz is Emeritus Director and Professor at the Krugman Center for Child Growth and Development at the University of Pennsylvania, and he is a leading expert on the anthropology of food. And you know what? He's done so many things for IRAS. He's been president of CASIRAS. He's been associate editor and co-chair of the Joint Publication Board of Zygon. Just read his biography because he has made so many contributions that if I read them all, he won't have time to give us his information. So I'm going to turn it over to one of the most wonderful longtime contributors I know of.
Thank you for that kind introduction, and it's just my pleasure to be here on the island with you all and to share some insights that I have. Can you hear me in the back okay? Because I don't know. Not really. Okay, we need to get the sound a little louder, I guess. Or maybe the microphone, I should hold it?
And I think we can move it. Do we have the... Let's see. Right now.
Okay, how's that? Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, I can try and deal with that too. Okay, well, before I started, I just wanted to give a plug for Rachel's Qigong, because it's perfectly designed for a guy like me, meaning that if you suffer from anything, you won't suffer after this. So this is a great way for the people who are in my age group, who are a little younger than me, or a little older than me, to enjoy themselves and start off the day. So if you can't swim in the ocean, right now I can't, that'll be a great substitute for me in the morning. So I'm looking forward to it, Rachel. Thank you for volunteering. So, having said that, I suppose I should say that I just got a question. How did Rachel do that light show? And I said, she didn't do it at the candlelight the other night on my favorite Jewish philosopher and theologian, Maimonides. It was Noah, my son, but I don't know if Noah's here or not. I can't see. Is Noah here? No, he isn't. Okay. Anyway, he has some little kids here, so they're taking up the time right now. Here's the story. I'm going to be making a presentation which is a combined series of slides that help me point out to you what's happening. I'm just seeing how this works. Can you see that little arrow there if I move it around? Okay, good. So I'll move it around a circle to get to whatever I want to talk about. That's one thing. The second thing is that I have a text. I usually don't have a text, but I actually have a text here. And I deliberately made it short. And I deliberately made instead of showing you 50 slides, which I am quite capable of doing, even though I'm not sure you're in any way capable of seeing or understanding, I decided to cut it to 10. So it's just 10 slides, about maybe 1,200 words, and I'm sure there'll be some interspersed comments. But what my basic point is I'd like to finish early enough for us to have a profoundly important discussion of what I think is perhaps the greatest problem facing humanity today, which is the incredible numbers of people who do not have enough food to eat tonight, or tomorrow, or the day after. And they're in numbers in millions, millions and millions, and in the most incredible combination of tragic circumstances that you could ever imagine have all happened. So the worst things that could happen have happened already, and who knows what's next, if you know what I mean. So we're really working with a major problem. So in essence, I talked about Maimonides the other evening, and I just wanted to say that his primary message to us, the Jewish philosopher, theologian, and physician, he was the physician of Saladin, the famous Islamic leader basically in Egypt, but also all through the Middle East. Basically, Maimonides reminds us that we can and we must, and that's our purpose, if you will. Is dealing with the other, and in this sense, healing the world. In other words, can we heal the world? And if so, how, is what I think I'll be addressing tonight. So this is, and I hope you'll join in when that time comes. So I say our food system is in deep trouble from climate change that is advancing so fast that we can no longer keep up the current production of food. And in spite of this, implementing many new greenhouse gas savings, it's still not working. So the mega question that we must face is how to create more sustainable agriculture and improve the social justice of the world that we were exploring this week. That's a tall order. That's a tough one, but I hope that we'll come up with some ideas about it. Right now, institutions like global trade that supported global peace in the past, that was one of the major things underlying the move towards internationalization of trade with China and with Russia and others. So supporting this global peace by engaging the autocratic nations of the world is unfortunately ending right now, as they have been turned into away from peace into a tool of war. So it's now shifted right before our eyes within the last year, from a tool of peace to a tool of war. So the same global trade system also crushed local abilities and capacities for food production in favor of a globalized neoliberal system that most of us now know is completely unsustainable. If you know anything about the food system, I think everybody here does, and so I'm not going to mince any words, and we can ask questions about it if you'd like, but that's my basic point there. So here's some background points that I think you need to know. First, there was a very important food summit that the United Nations established, and the head of the United Nations took over the planning for this, and even though the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, had done it in the past, he decided to do this on his own. So he ran a food summit in 2021, the September of 2021. It's not even a year ago. And in that, the food sovereignty movement, which was very active, and I'll tell you more about food sovereignty in a few minutes, but the food sovereignty movement, which is a social movement trying to favor local production of food and local control of agriculture and control of your diet, basically was so disorganized and so disrupted by this that they dropped out. They boycotted the entire conference. So that's a background that we need to understand. I'll be coming back to these issues. Then, and it's already clear that the COVID-19 pandemic created a great disruption in the supply chains of the world, and that supply chain problem turned into something else. It turned in not just the not being able to get the things when you wanted them, but having to pay a heck of a lot more for it when you did get it. And that multiplied out and multiplied out and multiplied out, which meant that the price of everything, including food prices, started to climb rapidly to levels that we have never experienced before, ever in the history of the many years that they've been recording this since the early, roughly since about 1960, the UN has been doing this as one of the themes that they followed up with when they formed after the Second World War. So adding to the supply chain catastrophe is even the larger one that has occurred with the Russian invasion of the Ukraine and the shutdown of food trade caused, which then basically was exacerbated by the fact that 34 nations, this is just announced this week, 34 nations have closed their borders to the export of key foods. So it meant if you could get the food before, you can't get it now because they're not letting it go up past their borders. 34 nations, that's a huge number. This cannot be made up in the system, even under ideal conditions. These are things that are so serious that there's some respects, there's no direct answer to them. The new report from the World, this morning I ran an article on the Beacon, maybe some of you read that, on the background of the problems that the World Bank is now covering, talking about the new loans that they're creating that have just been announced this week to counter some of these things like the 34 nations that are no longer shipping food. In case you don't understand the economic implications of that, they're very straightforward and simple. If I ship, let's say, corn from the United States, we're not doing this, but let's say I do. If I ship corn from the United States and the vast majority of the corn consumed in the world comes from the United States and I close the borders for corn, guess what happens? The price of corn in the United States goes way down. The price that the farmers get goes way down, but everybody is happy because now they can change that corn into ethanol and put that in their gas tanks, and the price of gasoline would go down, as an example. So this happened throughout the world, though. Big countries like India have stopped shipping food abroad. So this isn't a minor thing. So that the price of food around the world, outside of the borders of the US, or in that case, the borders of India, goes sky high. It goes even further, so it goes up much higher. So you harm the farmers in favor of preventing the population at home from having social unrest. That implication is critically important because that's what underlies the origin of the Arab Spring when the food ran out in northern Africa. So the $30 billion that was announced in this new loan that was just 4 days ago from the World Bank was for countries to buy food. But the problem really is it's too little money. That sounds like a lot of money, but it's too little and it's too late for lots of people who are starving and who will probably pass away as a result of their starvation. The famines are actually happening right now. They are happening right now. So in addition to that, of course, there's a tremendous amount of suffering that occurs when you talk about children who are not fed adequately, stunted in their growth. And the stunting, even if their food improves later on, the stunting is permanent. So there are a lot of mental effects of this. Therefore, their ability to perform all the things that you might want to perform as an important citizen of the world, you're no longer capable of doing those things as you grow older. So that's a problem that ripples through the future of the population as well as the present. The magnitude of the problem, regrettably, dwarfs all of the other tragedies that require our just help today. So it's not that I think that this is the only thing. There are many things that need our help. But in fact, this is the greatest injustice in the food in the world today, for sure, numerically. However, I'll say that this sad condition does not mean there's nothing left that we could work together to do. So this is my cry for tonight about ideas that we can all share that might help address these issues in the future, in the near future. At one level, we could revise our application, as an example now, to the right to food. The United Nations has a right to food that's been in existence right from its beginning, one of the most important rights that it has. The right to food to create new set-asides, though, to fulfill the right to food. Not every country subscribes to this, but not every country achieves this. So this right to food can be maybe able to be met by setting aside good resources, food resources, for the minimum needed for healthy foods for all in each nation. So healthy foods for all is the key to the questions, one of the major themes that I am advocating here. It isn't just food. It's not the potato chips in the stores around the world, or the other snack foods that are being that are very highly addictive, but do not satisfy the nutrient needs of the population. And instead, it's healthy food for all. I want to emphasize that. So such buffers of food resources can be planned to cover all of humanity in times like now, when we have run out of the resources to help all of humanity to survive. The numbers are rather incredible. It's hard to really get a full handle on the numerical meaning of it, but we're talking about in the order of several 100 million people right now who are in acute need. The total numbers are probably well over 1 billion, but I'm telling you, the acute needs are the ones that we need, who are not going to make it if we don't do something. And of course, Beardsley, the former governor of South Carolina, who is a very active Nobel Peace Prize winner for the World Food Program, has been out there, as you all probably aware, doing a great job of trying to present the issues. But it's overwhelming. It was overwhelming when he started the job, and now it's just become, he doesn't know, I'm sure he does not know where to go next, if you will. So part of it is there are things that are being done, but again, we need to focus them and figure out how can they work best of all. So now here's another point though about this. In essence, in the past we've talked about food for peace, knowing that the great sources of social unrest occur, as I mentioned before, as the result of food price increases. If we're going to achieve new sources of food buffers, we have to remove the profit motive that puts food affordability directly in front of the right to life-saving food. In other words, there's a plate at the table, and the moment you're hungry, the hungry person reaches for it, they slap his hand and say, put out a hand saying, how much can you pay for it? And there's a fundamental flaw in this logic, a fundamental flaw that we need to address. And I think if there's any place in the world that we can address that problem, is here on Star Island, it seems to me, at an IRAS meeting. Having to pay for food in the midst of starvation is no longer an acceptable expression of the capitalist-driven commodification of food. People should not be profiting off of these things, if you understand what I mean. It's clear. There are ways out, but it is up to our sense of support of food justice to make this happen. Even from purely political and economic justifications, it's far better to have peaceful societies than revolutionary ones. It's certainly going to happen. We're going to see this happening all over the world, and it will be very shortly. Right now, in the mistaken climate of political leaders covering themselves in the false flag of closing the borders to food exports, which drive up the global price of food and lowers the profit at home for farmers to keep food prices within nations to be lower, obviously do not work. Those whole processes do not work. And in that article that I put in the Beacon today, there's some coverage of that, and I can come back to that. But I think I sort of covered it already. If there are greater assurance provided by the national buffers that I'm talking about, that smooth out the price rises and social discord food prices create, we could move ahead. So I'm suggesting that the right to food means that there has to be the right for food for all, healthy food for all, and it has to be worked out in such a way that it becomes like a buffer that we deal with. In the United States, in some respects, there is a buffer. We call it SNAP. The SNAP program is that kind of a buffer. It could be better, for sure, but it is an example of one that works for a lot of people, like, 40 or 50 million people. So right now, in the mistaken, I'll start again because I realized I said that already. If there are greater assurances provided for these national buffers, we can move ahead. And right now, the new recommendations of the World Bank are necessary, but not sufficient to eliminate the problem as recommended earlier in the week that I mentioned in the Beacon. I have a copy of the Beacon, I think, in my pocket here. I hope I do. I could read it for you. Has anybody read this Beacon from the morning where I put all the stuff out? A few of you have, yeah. So I can quickly try. Let's see if this is the right Beacon. No, this isn't the right Beacon. Okay. I keep them in my back pocket. And that's not the right Beacon either. All right, well, you're going to have to, somebody's going to have to come up with a Beacon for me to, okay, thank you, from this morning. Thank you. I ran out of room in this pocket. I thought I had the right one. Anyway, so here's what they're recommending from the World Bank. They're recommending 4 issues. First, support vulnerable households, of course. And how do we define a vulnerable household? Very often it's the absence of any male in that household. Very vulnerable and Lesotho, for example, in Africa and South Africa, region of South Africa is an example where the males go out to work elsewhere in order to earn income, but the women run the households. We did a book on that, so I know something about it. Second, you want to enhance the next season's production. It's really important. Right now, the fertilizer prices have gone sky high, partly from the price of energy going sky high, and partly from the reduced amount of fertilizer being made in the war areas, and particularly in Ukraine. So, in essence, farmers. We're running a project, I'll come back to this in a moment, but we're running a big project in Africa right now, in Ghana. And my African colleague, who's an anthropologist, is there right now. But there's a 28% increase in the price of food in Ghana right now, 28%. So we think that a 5 or 8% increase in the price of food in the U.S. is astronomical. Try it when it's 1/4, more than 1/4 of your whole budget that's suddenly gone up. You can't afford to eat. Cannot afford to eat. So these things are really happening. And on top of that, the farmers are caught short. They do not have the money, the cash, to go out and buy fertilizer for next year's crop. So the crops are not being fertilized. And you know what happens with all these foods have been extended by the use of fertilizers, and the net effect is the production goes down maybe 50% of what it was. So we're talking about, independently of any effects of climate change, there's an enormous effect of not using fertilizer. They suggest investing in strengthening the resilience of the food systems. And of course, that's what I'm talking about too, the buffer approach. That is a buffer approach to saving foods. It reminds me of Jacob interpreting the Pharaoh's dream in the Bible about 7 good years and 7 drought years, and if you put away the food, you'll be the survivor. And the Pharaoh listened, and that's how Jacob arose in the Pharaoh's family. Fourth, though, they point out, they say, most importantly, facilitate increased trade by building international consensus. What they're talking about is you cannot close your borders to trade. That's a disaster in the making. That started under the Trump administration with China. You know, they put huge tariffs on the things we bought from China, and of course everybody stopped buying those things. But this is putting them directly on the closing the border for that purpose. So thank you for the loan of this. I may come back to it, so I'm going to leave it up here. You can pick it up. So right now, I think it's important to recognize that that there's lots of things happening, and one of those things that are happening is really important. And this is the leaders of what are called the food sovereignty. How many people here have heard of food sovereignty? Food sovereignty. So about maybe 40% of the people here who, and I'll define that a little later, but I wanted to know what your sense of that was. Food sovereignty is basically, it's a way of recognizing the local farmers of the world. And there are about 500 million small farm families in the world today that eke out a living trying to make the food available for their own families and for sale for others for a small amount of cash. In essence, these farmers are an enormous resource in some respects and an enormous burden in others. And our society has tended to look at them as a burden, but I look at them as a great resource. The global food crisis there's a Secretary General of a human rights organization working for the right to food and nutrition. And his comment is, and his name is Suarez, and he is suggesting, quotes, the problem is access to food. The people don't have the money to pay for food. That people are jobless, end of quotes. Food sovereignty leaders call for a fundamental transformation of the global food system away from food trade systems and instead towards domestic production and food sovereignty as a more viable way to solve aspects of this problem. So the food sovereignty people are a direct antithesis in some respects of what the World Bank is saying. All you need to do is to lift those trade restrictions, which are real, and I'm not denying them at all. But I'm saying that there's something else. There's another elephant in the room, and it's called capitalism in that sense. How do we deal with that? How can we run a world where both things are in operation? And I will come back to all of that as we go through the slides. So I want you to be aware that these people in the communities have been recognized really well by the climate change community. So the UN climate change report that was issued in December talks about the local people and the wisdom that they have about the land, etc., that is necessary for good, sustainable processes to be developed for the future of food in the world. Now, these people could be benefited tremendously, and they're a great, as I say, a great reservoir of human knowledge that could help to overcome the current unsustainable methods of agricultural practice. So right now, and I'll come back to this too, and define it for you in American terms, what the sources of unsustainability are and how it works. Food sovereignty is now quotes, this is from the Food Sovereignty Organization that represents these people. They do not represent all 500 million families, I want to make that clear, but they do represent hundreds of millions, and they're very important in the American hemisphere, if you will, the Western hemisphere here. Food sovereignty is the right of peoples, so quotes, is the right of peoples to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and their rights to define their own food and agricultural systems. It puts the aspirations and needs of those who produce and consume food at the heart of the food systems and policies rather than the demands of markets and corporations. And this is from the Declaration of Nyaleni, which took place in Africa, which is the first global forum on food sovereignty that was held in Mali in 2007. Our current research, this is my current research, our current research is focused on their right to define their own food and agriculture systems. It puts the aspirations and needs of these people who produce and distribute and consume the food at the heart of them. And we take this to mean culturally appropriate foods and appropriate recipes. So one of the things that I'm doing is starting a World Recipes project to talk about the transformation that occurs. And if you look at this chart that's up on the wall right now, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and take a quick look to that. So here's the social-cultural side, the food symbolism, the food traditions, etc., all are here, but they obviously interact tremendously with the agricultural system, and that agricultural system is part of an ecosystem that's being heavily shifted by climate change, and there are also biological significance of this, both from the point of view of what's consumed, this consumption at the center of this, and what's consumed biologically, and from the health point of view and infectious point of view, as well as from digestion and metabolism. Turns out I'll be making a big deal about digestion and metabolism in a few moments. And of course, all of this goes to the demographic shifts that have occurred with agriculture. So the origins of agriculture that we heard a lot about already this week have an important dimension with respect to the source of the changes that we're now encountering. Over the last 50 years, we've tested scientific hypotheses that repeatedly show how these recipes, that is how you transform the food from the field to the plate, if you will, how these recipes are the products of long-term evolutionary processes that optimize the nutritional balance and benefits of the agricultural revolution related to plant-based foods that basically underlie the success of our civilization's abilities to feed ourselves with health and food for all. So we have a new World Recipes project to explore and save these traditional recipes that are the product of hundreds and often thousands of years of biocultural evolutionary process. To develop this project further, we're now looking at, in Africa, in Ghana, which is in the sub-Saharan region of Ghana, that's northern Ghana, with a cereal grain called millet, pearl millet to be precise. Millet is a small cereal grain food, and in the non-Western world, it's about number 3 or number 4 is the most important cereal grain, but combining all this together, it's about basically number 6. So it's the 6th most important cereal grain. Probably very few people. How many people here have eaten pearl millet before? Oh, look at this. This is great. Most people talk about eating millet, but it's not pearl millet. There are a lot of millets around, and they're the smallest seeds. This is a little larger seed. A little larger seed is about the size of a, I don't know, the mental image that came up was a ladybug. Don't ask me why. But that's about the size of it. Anyway, getting back to this, the important thing is that we're looking at the recipes that evolved where the pearl millet was originally domesticated. It's the only crop, cereal crop in the world that was domesticated in Africa. And it's the first of its kind. And it's been very important, and it's been there for about almost, well, it's probably at least 4,500 BC when that was first domesticated. Very shortly thereafter, it got transferred to India, and it's a very important crop in India today. Maybe in some respects more important in India. It grows in the same regions of India, very dry areas. so it grows in the high deserts of India very effectively. And in Africa, it was domesticated right in what is called the Sahel area. The Sahel is the edge of the Saharan desert that goes right across the continent. And that distance from one side of the continent to the other is the very wide area in Africa on the continent. And it's a 5,000-mile plane ride just to go from one side to the other in Africa, over all these regions south of the Saharan desert. So this is an enormous area. But it was on the West African side, that in Mali, that this appears to have evolved initially. And it's a food that's consumed, there are about 100 million people in the world today that consume this food. And it has magical properties, literally magical properties. It is, from a climate change point of view, it evolved in the midst, right on the edge of a desert, so it can withstand temperatures in the low 40s without being harmed at all. Corn shrivels and dies at about 37 degrees centigrade. This is, those people who have never been here before, what it is, there is after lobster is served here, it is a mess to clean up. And everybody that works in the kitchen was involved in the mess. Ordinarily, we have a whole ritual while you're still here doing that. But all the workers run out and run down to the dock and jump in the water now. I don't know whether they're doing that. They seem to. Are they going down? Yeah. If everybody wants to take a quick look, I don't want to hold you back from seeing one of the great rituals. Ordinarily, you would have seen this already. Yeah, they got their clothes on. They just go in. How often can you... Here's a lecture on food, and this is on food waste. The good news I knew would be they get out of the water right away. They don't stay there very long.
They're not jumping in, so...
Oh, they didn't jump in?
No, they're not jumping.
Oh, they chickened out.
Yeah.
Well, it's a new crew here, what can I tell you? In the past, they always jumped in. But it was earlier. It was earlier.
They'll serve lobster in August, and they'll...
Yes, I think so. When the water warms up, they'll be, yeah, that's true too. You know, in August, it will at least be 63 in there anyway. But all kidding aside, it's quite a ritual here. So we have food rituals at Star Island, and we have food rituals of all kinds, including, if you think about it, how to prepare that lobster so that you can eat it, if you will. And that doesn't happen overnight. That happened over hundreds of years, and there's a whole history all of you could learn about, I'm sure, if you look up lobster consumption in the 18th century and realize that no one who had any money at all would ever touch a lobster. And guess what? No one would have any money at all today in Africa would ever touch pearl millet. It's a poor person's food. It's a poor person's food. And that was told to me in no uncertain circumstances when I did a study of this in Nigeria with a very sophisticated panel who finally told me the reason that I was saying, why doesn't everybody eat this pearl millet? And I'll tell you why in a moment, but why aren't you all eating this? And they finally said, look, it's a poor person's food. And what does a poor person's food do on your plate? It is never there, because it defines who you are. So we need to understand these subtleties, the cultural subtleties of the definition of ourselves and our identity through what we eat. Think about that, and thinking about all of the rules that cover our food that we consume in the world today. So the pearl millet that I mentioned, I'm going to look at my watch to see if I'm still in good shape. The pearl millet that I mentioned to you not only is very insensitive to high temperatures that are associated with climate change, it's also incredibly drought resistant. So it's one of these magical crops that puts down deep roots, becomes mature in 60 days, and it follows the exact cycle of the year when you do get the rain in the desert for a short period of time. And this puts out its little rootlets and et cetera, and quickly sprouts. So if you think about it, one of the unique qualities for cooking now, pearl millet, is to soak it. You soak it overnight. You don't soak it for an hour. You don't soak it for 2 hours. You soak it for at least 12 hours. And in that 12-hour process, the seed itself, like all seeds, have in it the ingredients to support the life of the plant and the ingredients to make that plant grow. So what we have then is a remarkable ability for a plant to quickly put out a root and get the leaves up in a very short period of time. So it's evolved around the capacity, if you will, to convert the substances that are in the endosperm of the seed. That's the biggest area of the seed. If you'd sliced it in half, you would see this. Anybody who soaks beans can do it with a bean. You can actually see the developing bean seed, if you will, after you've soaked it. It takes in the water, and because it's an osmotic process, the water has enormous pressure inside the seed, and it splits a seed coat that is like a rock. Literally, you'd have to hit these seeds with a rock to open them up without soaking them. In other words, they're so hard and so difficult, they're impossible to break open, if you will. But then it breaks open very easily. But in addition to breaking, that's what you visually see or experience if you're the chef. But there's something else that happens that you can't see, which is that the soaking sets off some hormones that are in the plant that cause the DNA to start to produce two very important enzymes. One is an amylase, that's an enzyme that breaks down starch to sugar. And the starch there's enormous quantity of starch in the plant, and now you've started the process of converting it to sugar, and the sugar, of course, is necessary for the plant. This is all for the plant's livelihood, if you will, not for ours. But it turns out that we can take advantage of that because now the starch is converted to sugar and we can digest it. And it's an excellent source of sugar, but it's not just sugar. It's sugar that's complexed with the rest of the fiber that's in there, and it has a very low glycemic index. So it's got a very interesting nutritional profile. But the second one is even more important. The second one is that there's phosphorus in the seeds. Every seed has what I'm talking about. Every cereal grain and the bean cereals are the bean foods, legumes that we eat, all follow the same pattern. And the pattern, this is why there's so few probably. That's why there's so few foods we eat. Because the foods that we eat have certain properties that are totally amenable to appropriate food processing. And that's a discovery process that takes many years and in an evolutionary sense becomes critically important. But getting back to this, the phosphorus is totally bound up by a compound called phytic acid. And phytic acid takes and binds not only the phosphorus, but it binds all the minerals that are in the seed to start with. So pearl millet's an excellent source of iron, it's an excellent source of zinc, but you can't get any of it unless you break down the phytate that's binding it all together in a big tight, jumble of threads, if you will. Well, it turns out that the soaking process causes the DNA to also stimulate a very large quantity of phytase, an enzyme that breaks down the phytate. So now the phytate is going away, and you now have the start of an excellent nutritional meal. But that's not the only thing that you do, but that's your first step. In essence, is soaking these things makes a huge difference in what you have in that and what you already have going into the further steps that are necessary in the cooking of these seeds becomes critically important in the evolution of the recipe. So if you think about it, let's just go to the next one here. If you look, screwed that up. So if you think about it, there's the basic model. Now there's an evolutionary process, 2 arrows. The bottom arrow, there's an evolutionary origins of the agricultural revolution. The agricultural revolution isn't just learning how to plant and domesticate plants, it's learning how to prepare them for consumption. Because you can have all of the plants in the world and none of them will make a big difference at all for you. You can't survive off of these plant-based diets unless you know how to convert it. So I spent a lot of time enjoying beer over this. Beer is a great one for barley and wheat. The 2 combined produced an enormous advantage, plus the psychotropic effects of the alcohol. I mean, you've got it all right in a glass, if you will. So I should have worn, I have a beer shirt I wore the other night, I should have worn it tonight. I apologize to my daughter who bought it for me. Anyway, but I'll wear it tomorrow. I guess that's what I can say. Okay, so now then there's an evolutionary process, and this goes through time. So these arrows of time that start were 10, 11, maybe 12,000 years ago with regard to some crops around the world. Some later than that and some no earlier than that, because it was a weather-driven climate change factor. But then it goes right up into the present, and we need to think, we've now run into a roadblock. The roadblock that we've run into is not having sufficient food production to adapt to the tremendous effects of 3 cataclysmic events that have happened. You know, the climate change reducing not just the quantity of food produced, sadly, it also reduces the quality of the proteins in the food. So the protein is going down. And in addition to that, of course, the pandemic, and then the inflation and the war all combined to create a catastrophic environment where the food is just not able, and then that's fitting within a capitalist system, which requires you to shell out money for every time the food is in front of you on the plate, and you don't have the money to pay for it. So this is where we find the world right now. So what I'm suggesting is that in the future, what we're going to need in this present and future food system, we're going to need improved abilities to deal with the foods that we have. So yes, we can learn a lot, and we're hoping my colleague and I in Africa right now working on this, we're trying to learn as much as we can from the most popular sources of the food we're looking at, which is cocoa, K-O-K-O. Even though it's in Ghana, everybody who knows Ghana knows chocolate is produced there. But the fact is that there's no chocolate in this. It's spelled with a different, it's pronounced simply, very similarly, but it's not the same as chocolate cocoa. This is cocoa for pearl millet. Anyway, I'll talk in another moment about that recipe, but I want you to know a few other things about that food. So it has a low glycemic index. It has a higher protein level than quinoa, or almost the same, but a little higher. And certainly the quality of the protein is excellent. It has no gluten, for those who are worried about gluten sensitivity. It has a very low glycemic index, so it means it's very good as an anti-diabetogenic food. And it has high mineral content that's necessary. Something fell. Oh, that was just my cane. I couldn't see. Anyway, the interesting thing is that right now the food that is the food that you make from this is remarkably stable, and what we end up doing is creating something different out of it in the second step of the recipe. So in the second step of the recipe, what we end up doing is we end up fermenting it. Fermenting you make it into a ball, or you leave it in a container, and you leave that for another day, or 2 or 3, and that ferments further. That fermentation process is not, though, connected to the water going in during soaking. That process is called imbibition, I-M-I-B-I-T-I-O-N, imbibition. But the second phase of this is what is called LAB, a lactic acid bacteria. And that lactic acid bacteria is like a starter for bread. It's a starter for using lots of different foods. And the lactic acid producing bacteria are safe for humans to consume. And it rules out all kinds of other bacteria that may not be safe for human consumption. So what you have then is this two-stage process of cooking it. These two stages, the first stage takes minimum of 12 hours, well actually more than that, it's 12 hours of soaking, but before you soak it you wash it thoroughly, etc. So you may have 13 hours, about an hour worth of preparation. That's not including anything that's done on the farm for the seeds, etc. And then you prepare that, crush those seeds up now that they've been softened, and you add these other products, some flavor products, but I would argue they're more than flavor. It's ginger, black pepper, all of you know, I think, how many people know what black pepper does? There's an enzyme called piperine. Has anybody ever heard of piperine in black pepper? Have any of you had the Indian spices with curcumin? Who drinks curcumin here? Turmeric. Turmeric is the origin of curcumin. Sorry, that's the active ingredient, the antioxidant in there. So, how many people have turmeric? Yeah, I've had turmeric. A lot of people have had turmeric here. But it turns out turmeric is loaded with curcumin, which is the really important antioxidant that you want to get out of it. But guess what? It doesn't get absorbed. It's really poorly absorbed in the GI tract. But if you consume it with black pepper, ground black pepper, it's loaded with piperine. The piperine increases the absorption rate by 2,000%. So you're talking about a major pharmacological reaction that's only been discovered in the last 15 years or so. So these are things that are happening. But the curcumin, I might add, with black pepper is a must-do if you're from India. So I mean that doesn't take any. That's an unconscious part of the recipe, if you will. And that's the point. Again, and all these recipes have features in them that we don't know about. Also, you need to know that the plant-based diets that all of us are trying to eat right now have hundreds and thousands of compounds in them that we don't even know what they do. Everybody who's following the cannabinoid literature realizes there are all these different formulations of THC and all the other things that you can get out of marijuana. But that exists for all plants. It's just that we don't know it. But the profit motive in that one is driving the discovery process. But there should be a discovery process in all of these things, because that discovery process, if you think about it, is going to enhance our ability to know how to tune these diets so that instead of eating food that we don't metabolize, so if you eat the turmeric without the black pepper, you've got the stuff, and it goes right through your gut. And in a sense, what we need is not field to fork. I want to introduce fork to gut, because the fork to gut is just as important for a waste of food than lowering the food waste from field to fork. And we need to revolutionize our thinking about all these things if we're going to make these things work for the future. So what I want to do is just to say that I want, in our World Recipes Project, to enhance the cultural significance of the food that people eat, to recognize that. But I want to go further than that. That's the beginning, if you will. There may be all kinds of things that are being done that we never understood what their significance was as we proceed to do the research on the recipes. So there's that, plus other things that we never knew were there. No one knew they were there, and scientifically we're catching up with that right now. So there are thousands of papers, literally thousands of papers now being written on plant products that are there, and we're now now having to continuously incorporate that and update and continuously just to understand this one recipe. This one recipe, by the way, is great for kids. Little kids can eat this, adults can eat it, people my age can eat it, everybody can benefit from this. And as I say, it has different amounts of pepper, so there are chili peppers that are put in it, but kids don't like chili peppers, as you all know, I'm sure. And so they can modify that, but it certainly and it has ginger in it, and likewise for the ginger, you can modify the amounts of this. And there are other products as well, but I point this out so that no recipe is pure something, it's other things too that are always mixed with it. So what we need to do then is we need to merge the contemporary science with these traditional foods that will help spread the sustainable climate change resistant agricultural properties of this food with the rest of the food in dire need of new sources of foods for healthy survival. So that's what I'm doing with regard to the pearl millet, and that research is going, as I started to say, I think about it, I was suggesting that the pearl millet basically the type we're studying is the type that is sold as a street food, and it's very popular. Ghanaian people are fascinated by, they're like the French cuisine or the Chinese cuisine for Africa. In other words, they're very, very proud of the foods that they consume. And they're aficionados of the street food. But this street food, because it's a poor person's food, guess what? You could eat a good meal, a healthy meal, for about 35 cents or 40 cents. Now, I don't know what that's costing now. Maybe 60 cents probably. I just don't know exactly. I mean, this is such fast changing times on food prices that I don't know all of it. But I do know that a few months ago, that was the price. So I want to continue. So here is this Neolithic to the Anthropocene shift in diet, and we need to keep up with it, and we're not keeping up with it. This is a whole missing link in the agricultural emphasis on food, and what we need to do is to deal more completely. I hope I can go to the next one. There. This is the opposite direction, sorry. Here is world population growth. This is an important thing. In other words, on that diagram, you saw population down at the bottom, demographic variable. And so here is the data from 1750 to 2150, roughly. I say roughly because we don't know for sure about the future, but we can estimate everything along the way. I might add that as I hold on to this thing and make sure that I don't fall over. I was born in the 30s. Hey, so in 1939, there were only 2.25 billion people in the world. Think about that. Think about that. The multiplication of the people in the world since then. We're talking about right now in 2022 over 7.8 billion. I just rounded this to the nearest tenth of billions, but it's over. It may be right at 7.9 billion right now, or if we round it up. So here is the problem. The problem is that world population has increased. But if you notice, all this commotion that was in the news this week, and I put in the beacon there, is all from the world, from the G7, pushing the World Bank into creating a new fund for food. And who's the G7? The G7 is along those more developed countries, along the border in that darker green, if you will, on the base of this chart. So populations in general, like for example, Japan is actually going down. Many countries are going down. The so-called developed nations thing, where people limit the birth of the next generation. On the other hand, less developed countries are still increasing at exponential rates. Exponential rates, maybe 2% or 3%. These are enormous rates of change. So even though the rate of new population growth, the rate of growth, not the amount of growth, the rate of it is going down. The actual amount of growth is still increasing. That's because even though there are fewer people choosing to have children, the ones who are out who do have the children are still increasing the overall population size. So there are two things going on that you should be aware of. All right, the point of all this is why we're running out of food. I mean, this is a Malthusian argument, but the question is, the old question with Malthus, of course, was when he predicted back here, he was predicting in this region that they were going to run out of food. As you can see, we've done a lot more since then. And the question is, will we be able to do more? And I think the answer is absolutely yes. We will be able to do more. Will we be able to do enough? I don't know, and that's what we're here to think about. So here's a problem with it. There's a thing called, I say negative externalities. I'll explain that in a moment, in anthronomics. I sort of invented this term a few years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, to deal with things that we were dealing with in anthropology, where the economists were just not paying any attention at all to them, because that wasn't paying for it. And as the anthropologists are great at asking economic questions, but didn't have any good methodologies for answering those questions. So I said, well, let's see if we can put the economic methodology in with the anthropology questions and see what we can come up with. So one of the things that I'm just using it, this is the classic example of supply and demand curves about cost. So I'll just point out one thing, that here is the cost, this cost now for a particular food, and in the US there's another cost. It's the real cost of the food. And here's what the real cost of the food, why it's much higher, and is because we externalize the actual costs of things in the US. And that's part of our system of capitalism. In other words, if we don't, here's an example. I grew up in pretty clean air, but I can remember visiting Pittsburgh once and then visiting Birmingham, Alabama once, and the smoke was practically killing me. The smoke was from the steel industry in both places. So if I was a steel maker in Pittsburgh, what I did is I made steel, used coke in doing that, and there's a tremendous amount of smoke produced by that, but I had this steel, and in the price that I charged you for making a new bridge based or a new building with steel didn't include anything about that smoke. I gave the cost of my coke, the cost of my iron ore, and the other metals that I smelted into this, et cetera, and the labor and all this sort of thing, and that's how I arrived at my price. But what I didn't do was include the effects of that on the environment, because the environment was free. Everything was free. Just as we've looked at the whole, if you think of our whole value system, is where we always think of ourselves as it was used to. I'm sure all of the people in this room remember when we thought of ourselves as the Wild West, you know, cowboys running out into the wide open spaces and doing anything you wanted, driving a train over it or running motorcycles, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, the important point is that there are negative things we're putting out in agriculture, and they're not part of the price. So there are three really important ones. Nitrous oxide, that's a major source of greenhouse gas. That's the nitrous oxide that comes from manufacturing fertilizer. Methane that comes largely from animals, but not just from animals, but largely from animals. And this is the agricultural source. Of course, there's a lot of methane that comes from other sources too in our society. But I'm just talking about it from there. And then finally, carbon dioxide. So these are the three greenhouse gases that are really important. But then there's also irrigation and water use practices. There's an enormous effect of agriculture on that, and we're not paying the price for it. Minimum prices for that. So it's recognized that water has got some cost to it, but minimum. And then we have food waste, field and farm storage, markets, restaurants, and homes and others for all kinds of food waste. So in other words, we're losing a lot of food and we're negatively externalizing the cost of that. So what we need to do is to now change the way a true cost of food, and if we took the true cost of food agriculture in the United States, we would all fall off our seats, because the actual costs are much, much higher. And what are we doing? We're polluting our environment, of course, we all know about that, but we don't do anything about it because the laws all have to be changed to fit that. And so we have to have, in a sense, revolutionary changes in order to understand what the significance of this. So these are the estimated global greenhouse gas levels from the EU calculations for over the years. 2010, 20 to 25%, and by 2050, 44 to 52% of all the greenhouse gases are going to come from our food system. Think about it. So here are the price of food that we're very concerned with. This is the price of food. This is the real cost. The real cost of what does it cost you on your plate. The nominal is another economic factor that's part of the cost that FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, created back in 1961, a food price index in order to give the world a sense of what the cost of foods were all about. And as you can see, there have been some ups. There was a huge up. Right at this point, people thought in the U.S., how many people remember the Club of Rome? The Club of Rome? Raise your hand. A few people remember the Club of Rome?
Club of Rome.
Yeah. No, that was the group. How about the population bomb? Yeah, you remember that from the. So these are things that happened in the 70s, and they were all in response to this tremendous increase in the price of food that something went up in the 70s. Of course, everybody thought that was the end of the world, but they didn't know about this man from Texas who figured out how to create the Green Revolution, of course. And he won a Nobel Prize for that work, a Peace Prize, incidentally, for that work. And that really transformed agriculture around the world. Then suddenly the price of food went down, as you can see, down, down, down. Right here, we're into very low levels, below 100, if you will, which is like the ideal price, if you will. And that didn't go back up until the U.S. decided to end, unilaterally decided to end corn prices as existing. Instead, they added the increased cost to farmers, and that raised the price of corn all throughout the world, because we're by far the leading producers in this. This is how commodities work in the world markets. And then in addition to that, of course, we converted a lot of that food to fuel. And that's how I got re-involved in all the anthropology of food, because I caught up with all that. And anybody who wants to read a paper I wrote on it might be interested. I'll be happy to share that with you. But okay, so then that peaked again with the economic downturn. And finally, what we have at the end of this is a rapid increase, just about all the factors I talked about. So it's now at the highest levels ever, and it doesn't look like it's going to go down anytime soon either. There's no reason to think it's going to go down. So this means we're talking about a crisis worse than anything we've ever seen before, and that's a problem. So just to quickly go into the World Recipes Project for a moment, I want to talk about two things. First, the industrialized agricultural system. On the top, if you notice the top cross here, this is the industrialized side of the equation, and here's the food sovereignty tradition on the other. These traditions that maintain the food system. So the industrialized works with big food processing markets. This is contemporary big food. This is what we're eating mostly on. Not mostly, some of it's not from this, but a good amount is from this we're eating now in the kitchen here. But to some degree, there's some of these traditional food items in there as well. So there are new foods that are being produced all the time between the agricultural crop economies and old foods that are traditionally consumed. And these are the balancing. So which side of the equation that we're on, it's a balancing act. There's no simple solutions to these, but both of them are tearing away. And right now, the food sovereignty tradition is losing ground because of the poor support that it got from the UN in the last year. But it's not gone, I can tell you that. So here's what we're doing in the World Recipes Project, is we've identified the traditional iconic food recipes and arguing that if we place them in the center of this interaction between the contemporary big egg products and the traditional foods, there may be ways that we can actually come up with enhancements to the diets that we have and add to them without changing the traditional food that people want to consume. So with that in mind, I'm now suggesting that we look at this evolutionary picture that I developed before from the Neolithic to the Anthropocene. And what I think we need to be thinking about are two knowledge spheres: exchanging information with justice, respect, understanding, and a sense of responsibility, just as Maimonides would have suggested to all of us. So scientific and technological knowledge is being accelerated over contemporary time. Right now, thousands of papers are being published. But that has to be interacting with the indigenous knowledge that's evolved over time. And that's what this is all about. So we have to have new ways of doing that. I put this one in here just to show you that the UN has, of course, a whole series of 17 different programs that are ongoing. And they're hoping that some of these things will be integrated, and we are too. We're trying to work with different people at the UN about what we're doing. And I'll end there. Thank you. I think we have time for questions. I think in about 15 minutes.
Yeah, it's 9 and candlelight starts at 9:15, so we could take a couple minutes, I think.
Okay, good. You got yours. I'll stay up here then.
So the bottom line of everything that you have shared is sustainability, right?
You know, I want to redefine sustainability to you, so if I can
Okay.
do that, I'll be happy to do
Okay, but when I read that this morning, what you wrote, these four, what did you call them? These four
Here at the-
strategies, right, of some kind.
here
It's
at the-
just more of the same. Strengthening the resilience of the food system,
That's what the World
facilitating
Bank is called.
increasing trade.
That's the World Bank's.
Yeah, I
message.
understand that.
Okay.
So the World Bank and the UN, these strategies are not sustainable. And that's all we've got. So your whole approach is to transcend these kinds of strategies which don't work.
To some extent, yes, but let me
Yeah.
explain, because you didn't read the last paragraph. There's a paragraph on the next page of the beacon, at the very page, and it says, to strengthen the traditional agricultural, these are the four things that I suggested that fit with what the World Bank is. I'm not going against them, by the way, entirely. In some respects I am. To strengthen traditional agricultural supports for food production and add new sources of agricultural extension and education. There's a great thirst for knowledge among the food families, the food agricultural families. I've lectured on this in Japan, or a lot of different places I've talked about this. Right now, I can tell you, there isn't one of these families who wouldn't love to have a smartphone in their hands. And if we got this smart guy called Elon Musk who's putting up all these satellites that will make these phones work, we could have agricultural extension, allowing these farmers to suddenly increase their ability to produce food very quickly, because they got the energy, they've got the land, they've got everything going, except they don't know exactly what they could do. And if we give them the fertilizer and the knowledge and the incentive to educate themselves and their families and their communities, there is a great opportunity there to extend the knowledge sphere, if you will. That's one. We got to go the farm to fork. We've got to improve, but then again, I'm saying the fork to gut is another real giant resource that we haven't tapped into. That's another one. So we may find that less consumption of food is more. Think about that. So that's one of the possibilities. Another one is marshal new spiritually sensitive interreligious dietary prescriptions and proscriptions that reinforce the transformation that needs emphasizing and support. These measures call upon our emerging understanding of our concerns with the other in our communities and lives in new ways. What I'm suggesting is we're working with that very language, the very conceptual framework allowing us to make big differences in many people in this room are into religious dialogue. I would say the majority are. And what I also would say is that we have the opportunity, it's sitting right in front of us, and it's a matter of us to join in and create that opportunity. So the final thing I want to say about sustainability, you know, I worked with the various American Native indigenous peoples, and the Iroquois nations are very famous. They were the Iroquois nations that George Washington negotiated with to help him win the Revolutionary War. So there was they were very sophisticated. Their idea of sustainability was if you couldn't track out that this thing you wanted to do, this change you wanted to do, that if you couldn't prove, or not prove, but at least consider what it was going to do 7 generations down the road, you shouldn't be doing it. What I'm saying is that we can't even get anything we're doing next year. If we have a Congress that does a budget each year, we have to have, fortunately, the agricultural budget is a 5-year budget in the United States. We can have other budgets like that are operating. We need to think through the entire process, and these are the times to do it. But starting with the ag budget, it's in the works right now. Everybody in this room could be influencing how that agricultural budget goes, and it could be easily, not easily, but right in the current circumstances of really unsustainable practices of climate change, et cetera. There are a lot of things that could be done that aren't there now that could be there.
We have one more question.
Sorry, just Tina Ruprell, just a quick question. I'm curious why you put infectious disease in the ecosystem thing. That's just a bit of a detailed question.
I did it, yeah, well, I did a lot of stuff on parasitic diseases that are in the when something becomes endemic, like COVID, et cetera, or swine flu or something of this nature. That's why I put it in there.
Okay, and I was curious that you said that this magic recipe is something that was particularly, associated with the poor. And I wonder whether that might be a strategy to look for other sources, other foods, other recipes, to look for the food of the poor. A kind of, as a liberation theology sort of had a privileged position for the poor, maybe we need a liberation gastronomy.
Super comment. I like the idea of the theme that represents. I've done a lot of that work already, but I haven't done it under that heading, so it's very interesting thinking about it. So I've done all the basic work on maize. Maize is the superfood that underlies the great civilizations of the Western Hemisphere, but maize has a nutritional limitation in it, fundamental one, and it has niacin, but the niacin is indigestible in the maize, and if you learn how to digest but we can't, eating it, or, with the stomach acids, etc., doesn't touch it. So it goes right through our system, we don't get the niacin, and we develop pellagra. That happened for hundreds of years in Europe after Columbus brought maize back without the recipe. And it's got into Africa that way as well. So there's, and in India, so it got all over the world. And there's lots of pellagra around the world, except in the so to speak, in the Americas, where it was treated appropriately, and it's treated with an alkali. So treating it with an alkali, so it ashes from shells, that's one, from mollusks. In fact, it's surprising that you would not, because you could think an easier way to get your ashes, they're from wood ashes, from fire. But in fact, that's a potassium salt, the others are calcium salts, and they appear to be much better, and it has a different flavor too. So the bottom line is the alkali in that breaks out the maize, and we were able to prove this cross-culturally with all the recipes that have been recorded for for 100 years by anthropologists. and we put out a major paper on that. It's still the classic citation today in science, almost 50 years ago to the day.
Great.
But that was the first, many others, fava beans, barley, wheat, all of these fit the model. The point is that none of them fit in a model of a sustainable food the way pearl millet does. And coincidentally, the year 2023 has been designated by the UN and the FAO as the year of the millets. So there's going to be a lot of emphasis on this. So get ready. If you've already tried it, great. If you haven't tried it, see me for a recipe. I'll get you the recipe that will really work. And we're making videos of the recipes by the street food vendors in Ghana right now.
Great. We need to stop, it's 10 after. Thank you so much.
I hope this is the beginning of a conversation that we can continuously have. It's just starting. The seeds have been planted.
Fascinating. I was looking up for a little bit as we were talking. Yeah. But I saw some recipes for just boiling it, but is that not for a millet? Okay, then I saw, okay. But a different kind of millet.
You know, it's a millet that Americans can eat because you have a great diet. But if you're living off of this, that's a big mistake.
Okay.
Yeah. I got to say, like one of these people.
Is that if you buy it in the store, the powder, you have to get pepper with it. And if you buy turmeric root, and, then you don't have to put pepper with it. Is that wrong?
Yeah, it's wrong.
It's wrong. So if you
Well, it's wrong if you want to get.
well, yeah, that's what I mean. I was reading that you would
You can
get
just shut this and not tell me.
what I've read.
Just shut the lid.
Oh, shit, okay. This is their mouse, right?
This is theirs, but I'm gonna keep it. I'm gonna return it. I told them I would return it myself. That was
So
great.
what I've read is that if you was working with turmeric root and eating it directly, that you did not need the pepper. That was wrong.
Wrong.
Okay. Okay. I've learned something. Now, the other thing is, I don't quite understand how you're going to get food around the world if you eliminate capitalism. I mean, there are
No,
different
that's
kinds
what
of
I'm not.
capitalism.
Your point is well taken. I hope that I should have left more time to talk about that very thing. In other words, how are we gonna, that's why I talked about two sources. That's what that whole ending was all about. How do you merge two things? And is it the synthetic foods that we can, in other words, the revolution, I think, has to start with new kinds of food that you discover and have natural properties. Make money, okay. Create good things out of the environment. And clearly, the biggest source is right out here, the ocean.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. That was very, very informative. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad I could share it with you. I hope that,
And I'm glad you're doing the work.
yeah, I'm doing the work. Can you believe I'm still doing the work? Crazy. So what'd you think, Dan? Very what? It's depressing, yeah, it's not.
No, but Saul always has, you always have solutions, that's the thing.
It's okay, we can talk now.
Putting money toward fertilizer for that community gardens, village plots, whatever, so you can eliminate the middleman and the price.
That's what this is all about. I agree with that. I agree with that. That's why I'm saying agricultural extension, right to the people who know how to use it. I don't
Remember, so people grow their own stuff.
Well, that's for them. That's for them. That's what I was saying.
Yeah.
That 500 million. That's 500 million.
That's going toward that.
That's family, not.
Oh, I thought that was going toward just giving them food.
No. That's exactly opposite. The other one's producing the food. They're producing food for themselves too. They're the poorest people in the world.
So that's exactly what you're doing. They don't have to worry about
It's set to go off on another.
Okay, well, that's what I'm saying, that's what you're doing.
In other words, is so evident, but it's not part of the system. That's the system. They were ruled out by the UN. And the guess who got it? In my opinion, I'm almost certain it was from Microsoft. It was the Department of Gates was involved in eliminating their presence because they were in the way of the big ad. Oh, well, this is the food sovereignty that got settled.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. It was wonderful. Yeah.
I gotta go to the candlelight. Are you going to candlelight? Okay. Kevin is, oh yeah, this is a must go. Is it on right now? No. Oh, good, because I just have to rest for a minute. I'm just gonna sit here, Pauline. I don't stand for that long anymore. Anyway, I hope it was clear.